TIL Betta fish are very intelligent. They have been known to be able to recognize their owners. There are even some betta fish that can do tricks like pushing a tiny ball through a ring using their nose. This is something that most fish are incapable of. My friend Steve has a betta fish that does his taxes. Ugh, this makes it even more awful to see them sitting in small, featureless cups of water on the shelves of a PetSmart. I am fostering a turtle and had to go in there for the first time late last year and was so depressed seeing plastic containers with bettas in them, stacked one on top of another. I don't know enough about fish to know if this is as awful as it feels to me on a gut level, though. I had a betta fish named Ponyo that used to go absolutely bananas when he saw me next to the tank. When he passed away, he actually moved his body right to the front of the tank and I watched him take his last breaths. I always believed he saw me and understood how much I cared for him. I was agoraphobic at the time, so we spent a lot of time together. Before him, I never really believed that fish understood much of what was going on outside of their tanks. Rip Ponyo. I still miss your crazy ass. I love educating people on betta fish. They don't deserve to be confined to tiny homes with zero stimulation. Changing up their environment is a good way to keep them entertained as well. I use a dry erase marker to draw new things on her tank and she gets super curious and checks them all out. I've taught her to follow my finger, and if you show them their reflection, they'll show off. Just hold a mirror up to them and watch them, it's super entertaining. Just be sure not to overstimulate them, it's a fine line. ETA, I only speak from personal experience about the mirror play with a female betta. Let me clear that up. I have researched it a bunch, and everyone just says to make sure you monitor your fish for signs of distress. I know her very well, so I know exactly what to look out for. Meanwhile, my betta fish can't seem to figure out where the food is when I drop it in. I used to have a betta that would blow me kisses if I made a quiet face at it. It would come up to the surface and basically take a breath of air, but it did it every time I would make kissy faces at it. At least that's what my brain remembers happening when I was like 9 years old. It happened is all I'm saying. I don't know how me talking to this Google writer made that silly face, but I'm leaving it. I taught mine to swim from the top of the tank to the bottom and back to the top. Now she does it anytime she sees me. I reward her with food. I had a betta I trained to jump for food, and flare on command. They are fun. Since they are tropical, they respond very well to color if you are looking to start. For the mirror, I'd hold a green marker cap with a mirror. Fish sees themselves in the mirror and puff up, but eventually starts to associate the green cap with the other fish. Used a red scoop exclusively to feed him and got him cozy eating from it while it was on the water, and slowly raising the height. My dad had a betta he had named Jim for a few years. When he'd lose something around the house, he'd point and yell at Jim for losing whatever it was, like, "Damn it, Jim. Where'd you put my keys now?" My betta, Mercury, Merc, definitely recognized when I would come home from work and come into the room. He'd always swim up to the corner and follow me around the tank until I gave him some attention. Miss that good boy. Fish is a deceivingly large classification. Essentially, it's most things in the sea, just bunched under one label. Yes, there are a lot of other groups as well, but fish are by far the largest single group. Mammals and birds, for instance, are an incredibly tiny group compared to the complexity of beings entailed in fish, especially since a lot of the former are evolved from the latter, making the latter group large even geologically thinking. It's just something that was mentioned somewhere and it stuck with me. Some humans are also incapable of this. And I see them floating all the time in Walmart tanks. I had a betta fish named Julius Caesar, may he rest in peace, who, as far as we could tell, missed me when I went away for 2 weeks. My mother was responsible for him while I was gone, and she says he sulked even more than usual. He liked to hide in his plants anyway, but it was a lot. When I'd feed him, he'd get really excited and dance around. He died a few months ago of stress. I don't know. But he was a good friend. Fun betta fact, A group of female bettas is called a sorority. Bonus fact, female bettas are adorable. One could say that they're better than all the other fish. Oh, is this why my bosses keep calling me a betta all the time? Betta fish also do not belong in tiny bowls. They are tropical fish that require 5-gallon tank minimum that is filtered and heated. Given the right conditions, they will live for up to 7 years or longer. My betta would flip out when I'd walk into my room coming back from work, mostly for food. They do so much better in well taken care of tanks with their full colors coming out literally and figuratively. Bettas also get depressed when they are placed into a tank that's too small, and ultimately die a very early death. An adult betta needs at least a 1-gallon tank. I've had the same betta for 3 years now, in a 3-gallon aquarium, and can confirm that he recognizes me when it's time to eat. If I pick up his food, and shake it a few times, he will immediately swim to the front of the tank and dart back and forth with excitement, incapable or unwilling/incompatible with the methods being used. Most fish are capable of vastly more complex tasks than pushing a ball through a ring. This seems like a poor barometer of cognitive capability. I hate that pet stores keep them in tiny cups. I used to have a betta that would tap on the glass if I forgot to feed it in the evening. I have no idea how. The tank had river stones, not pebbles, so no way he could have picked up a rock. No one would believe me, but my hubs heard it too. It wouldn't do it if he came to bed and turned out the light first, only if I was in the room. He definitely knew me and knew I was the only one who fed and cared for him. If anyone else would look into the tank, they'd get ignored, but when he saw me, he'd get super excited and follow my fingers. Also, PSA: don't use river stones in your tank. One day I came home and his little head was trapped. He must have been exploring and the rock moved and pinned him. Rip Chico, sad but relieved face. Reason number 1001: we shouldn't be putting them in little cups of water and unfiltered fish bowls. You know, I didn't think those store-bought betta in the tiny cups could get any more depressing, but here we are. Yay, I'm smarts. I had to. With one I used to hold a pair of bangles under the water and he'd swim through the hoops, and if I moved them he'd loop back round and swim through again. The other would follow your finger along the front of the tank. The cat used to paw at the tank wanting to get at him, and he'd think it was the game and follow her paw, which wound her up hilariously. Those fish were fantastic dudes. Literally this morning I just gave a presentation on Betta splendens. This timing is a little fishy. My old betta was pretty talkative. What most people don't realize is a healthy betta isn't just vibrant, but can communicate via making their colors flash a bit brighter and making a kind of clicking noise. Of course mine did this entirely to voice his displeasure when I cleaned his tank in a way he didn't like, but still, I appreciated his candor. For real. I used to have one around my Jr. high years. Was living with my grandmother at the time and she cracked me up. She was renovating that whole house so it would sell for a lot when she put it up for sale. She did up the whole backyard, laying down all these stones down, and would take that fish bowl outside with her because she swore that fish loved the change in environment. He might very well have. Was a smart fish. He knew when he was getting fed. He recognized his little food tin and would wait for his food flakes to get sprinkled in. One day I got distracted and paused a moment with his food tin poised right over the lip of the bowl while I was saying something to my grandmother. He jumped up out of the water and smacked that tin and flakes fell down for him to eat. Surprised the hell out of us both. That became the feeding game after that night. I'd hold his food tin above the water and he'd jump out and bump it. Little did I know I had been training him for his death. We got home one day and saw him on the floor. Must have happened recent enough because we saved him in time and he was okay. So he lasted for a long time after that. We just started putting a screen over the top of his fish bowl for his own safety. Unfortunately, all it took was one day of not diligently keeping that screen on the top of his bowl though. We did not find him in time when he jumped out of his bowl for the last time. Rip little guy.